Hello, and welcome to another, well, I guess you could say, um, in depth, not analysis, but kind of like my take on themes that I've been kind of going through recently. I've been watching some shows and kind of picking and choosing. I don't know, part of the growing or the elevating process, so to speak. Elevating, yeah, that same thing is kind of being conscious about and aware about what we watch and put into our minds and what we kind of expose ourselves to, because the subconscious is very much like, it's like one of my students that I had before with English said he knew something about it, and he was right. He said that with the subconscious, it's like the back door. You want to be careful about what we put into our bodies. Well, more like in terms of what we watch. And one of the shows that I still watch today is Star Trek, and Star Trek Voyager specifically, because I don't know. I suppose I enjoy the the old sort of way of, like, I guess CG. I don't know what you want to call it. Like, just like the whole, like, what it looks like. Just having fun, enjoying it. But I do pick and choose which episodes that are kind of more like, they go towards negative. They go kind of it. But at the same time, it depends on how much a person has actually become more aware and how much they've grown. You know, and one of the things that came to me was like these two specific episodes. Maybe there's more, I'm not sure. But the themes about it were regarding, what our fear about death and our fear and having faith and going beyond that. And, well, the episodes I wanted to share with you were Season 3, right here, Season 3, Episode 7, so it's called Sacred Ground, and Season 4, Episode 12, called Mortal Coil. The story is that with the Sacred Ground, for those who don't know Star Trek, well, Voyager, there's a series of it. There's different series, there's Star Trek. There was the original Star Trek, and then Star Trek Enterprise, or the Next Generation. There's Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Voyager, and some of the themes they put in here they start to become more clear when it comes to things that we're becoming more aware of, with how we're really just evolving and elevating. With this episode, it talks about how you said, like, it's really about that letting go and trusting that the divine has purpose and divine timing. When we're afraid of death, that we're afraid of things that are ending or that we can't save people, it does tie back into that egoic fear of it losing itself. There was this, what was her name here? There was a guide here who was basically telling that you have the answers all in yourself. And then she had to the captain of Voyager, she had to go through this sort of, not, I could say pilgrimage, sort of like this process, but basically it didn't really mean anything, because it wasn't the doing, it was the being. So it really ties into that. I don't know how they were able to do this. Like, the writers must have been aware of these things way back in the 90s, and they kind of showed it through the stories. Sometimes when we don't learn necessarily from direct learning, like through classroom and someone telling us and getting information, but through stories. And I like that, because it's like there's this one episode that shows that. And then the other episode, where one of the characters in the show, he thought that at the end of the journey, like he said, apparently he died, So he was like dead for 18 hours and they couldn't resuscitate him or revive him. But there was this procedure that he had to go through where he had some, what they call the Borg nanoprobes. And so that kind of helped him to revive. And he had this sort of like identity crisis. The ego losing itself, going crazy. I'm like, oh my God, I thought I was going to have this beautiful, ever after life, after I die, and then I'm going to meet my family again. And so, but it's funny because when you look at it, it's actually, that's usually what most of us think, that it's like, okay, it's just this kind of happy ending kind of thing, because we're raised under that notion. It's very Disney-like, So I would say, like, what the process we go through that is, first of all, one, if you want to see it in your chart, for me, the way I've seen it is like I go through like the 12th house, and this is kind of mixing a little bit of what I'm learning from horary astrology with what I already know from natal. Is the 12th house is the shadow of the 6th house, right? So in this episode right here, with Neelix as the character, he realized that at the end that his family needs him, his new family. So his he had to go back into that sort of servitude mode of giving, and because it's like at the end, basically, it's like when you start to give of something, people, many of us kind of are told, or we start learning, or from experience start learning, that when it comes to finding ourselves, elevating our emotions so that's high frequency, is through, I guess you can say servitude, not necessarily servitude, but like helping others. We start to realize, oh, I have this gift. So you start to elevate it, and it's like a healthier ego, right? But of course, we know that it's more than that, right? So we usually look to the 12th house and the 6th house because they're parallel to they're opposite of each other, and it's also starting anew because the 6th house, once we start to, the 6th house also rules the unconscious, right? So it's like when we're doing things so naturally, so it's not really about servitude. But once we realize that when we're going through that, we eventually get it, that transfers over to the 7th house into relationships, and then eventually it ends through the 8th house, which is the house of death, basically. But it's also in horary astrology, it's the house of fears, and so it's where you fear to go beyond the limits. What's ahead of us, right? Mars, I forgot what Mars really represents, but it's before Pluto came along, Mars was something else, and I believe Mars was also kind of representative of not necessarily death, but like, when you go for something you want and you have that sort of same energy. I'm not really sure exactly through the words in horary astrology, but because in astrology we have a certain vocabulary that we usually just follow and kind of in a way adhere to, and we have to kind of in a way go with that to kind of be more consistent. But yeah, so 8th house is the house of fear, but also the house of death. I think that's in modern astrology. Fear is the one that is the ones from the past, so it's traditional astrology. But either way, they're kind of basically the same thing, right? What we're afraid to go into, the taboo, right? And then it goes into the 9th house, which is having faith, and then basically it's where we start to embrace, the 9th house is another house. It's another house where it's about a new beginning again. Every time you have a house that's ruled by a fire sign, it's in modern astrology at least, it is going from the house of an ending itself, which is usually represented by water, into fire, right? It is a transition. It's a rebirth. It's a beginning anew. So there you go. And then you go from the ninth house to the 10th house. It goes back into that whole sort of like ego thing as well. So there's always a connection between the houses, but if you really kind of want to see where in your chart, you look into those houses and see what planets are there. But usually in modern astrology, we look more towards the planets rather than the houses. In horary astrology, traditionally speaking, they look towards the houses. That's the way I understand it. But going towards more like I'm trying to connect both I guess modes of astrology, both subdisciplines or disciplines. But traditionally, of course, Saturn was considered like the end. He was the limit. He was the lord of something. I forgot. Not necessarily, I guess, death, right? Because back then they didn't know beyond Saturn. So they said he was ending into the unknown, to the mystery, to the outer world. So Saturn ruled Capricorn, of course, and Saturn rules Capricorn to this day. But if you connect Saturn through Capricorn into the 10th house, it also is a little bit about fears, not necessarily fears about like death itself, but fears like what's beyond. At least that's the way I understand it. Correct me if I'm wrong, it's totally fine. The 8th house is also like that, like I said, transition from death into faith into the 9th. So, I don't know, that's just it. So, I would say from my experience, I'm going to show you my chart here. Okay. I'm just going to go through it as quickly as possible. When I say quickly, I don't really mean quickly. But, so I have experienced this myself. This is my actual birth chart. Yeah. So, and usually when you look at Saturn, it's kind of tied into this one right here. Oops. Make that black and make that thicker so you can see it. Okay. So Saturn right here is the limitations of communications because it's in the 3rd house. Wherever your Saturn is, it's where you're going to deal with things that you overcompensate. Right, so I definitely used to do this a lot more, where I would overcompensate. I kind of worked hard to make sure things were communicated. But these days, as I've evolved, Saturn is now. I'm not going to show my progression chart here, but my progression charts show, as you may or may not already, progression charts show how much we've evolved over time, and it's more of a psychological change, not necessarily like your birth chart is always going to be the imprint and the strongest. It's a sort of example, or the strongest, most potent proof. You can say proof, or something that shows that's what energies were when you're at the time of your birth. It's an imprint. It's astrological DNA. All right. So, with Saturn here, yeah, I overcompensated. But here we also have Jupiter is conjunct Saturn here. And so that means that I tended to have this, I had ideas, I was always like optimistic about learning, but then there's always some sort of limit because I didn't know how to express those ideas. Especially when I was a kid, I was very, very quiet. I was very but when it came to times when I needed to talk, because people would correct me, this is also with authority figures. Saturn represents authorities, okay? Which ties into the 10th house as well. And it was, so I had to learn how to do that. I had Pholus here, opposition. So Pholus was making these decisions, but in this continuously, it's in retrograde, so I continuously had to learn what information to say, or what kind of things I wanted to share with people. It is a 3rd house thing, right? So naturally, 3rd house is ruled by Mercury, so usually comes out, it's kind of expressed through the 3rd house when it comes to like things like expressions, like self-expression specifically, because Mercury is closest to the sun. It's like it's the closest, the next planet after the identity itself. So this is why Mercury is often seen as the self-expression, especially if it's tied to your sun. For me, it was sort of this in-depth, like instinctive knowledge because I had it in Scorpio. So yeah, but in any case, the point is you look towards your Saturn. That's just an example of my chart going, okay, I've always had this and I had to make the decision, do I express it or not? Do I express it specifically when I have like these insights or like this sort of wisdom that just comes through, specifically the 9th house, which is higher education. And I did have, like, as I grew up, especially when in university, people thought that I would be like this sort of show-offy kind of person, and I'm just like, well, now I realize, oh, that's their shadow. So apparently, like, I'm to bring that to them. I'm to bring that sort of how do you call this? That expression to them, and that actually kind of because we're talking about school, right? Higher education. So we look into what rules the 9th house. In this case, it is Pisces. It's right here on the cusp of the 9th house. So that would mean that I look to this right here. So it's Neptune, but also Jupiter. See, both charts. But we're looking at it strongly from more like the 3rd house perspective, but 5th house too. Things that I enjoyed. So things that, like, when it comes to languages, I did experience this quite a lot, where it's like people would think I'd show off. I'd be kind of this braggy kind of person because I just wanted to have fun. I just wanted to experiment. I just wanted to, just use or whatever, just be exposed to something. It doesn't necessarily mean it's language, but also with foreign people, foreign things, foreigners as well. Also with sports. It did come through with sports, but so sports, anything sort of recreational sports and things that I enjoyed, but also like languages, like learning any sort of new idea that I learned, people always perceive that. And this is why I had that Saturn is there showing this, like, watch out for those things because you have those fears and limitations that hold you back. But remember, the Saturn is also not just fear, but the shadow as well. It's part of the shadow where you make certain choices, karmic choices, that if you reveal this, if you express this, if you do something, whatever it is, whatever house it's in your chart, that there are consequences to that, whether or not you believe it's for good or bad or whatever. And in my case, the good or bad was that I enjoyed it, and there are people that I resonated with me, but there are people that didn't resonate with that. They thought I was, again, show-offy, and then it's like, whatever. So I said, as I got older, especially now, it's just like, I'm like, fuck that. It's just like, whatever. You see me as show-off? That's your shadow. That's not mine. So I started to embrace my, like, my show-offiness. My, it's interesting because it's like, I'm following my North Node, as probably you've noticed already, or I've talked about it before, following my North Node path and just committing to just having fun and enjoying being more childlike. And it's funny because you have, with Neptune ruling the 9th house right here, when it comes to this sort of wisdom, this sort of like knowledge, just wisdom that comes through the higher consciousness sort of thing. And this is a 9th house thing. It's not just higher education, it's also higher consciousness, but because of it, Neptune here, but also Jupiter here, so definitely it ties into that. But there's also 5th house, which is ruled by Leo, and through Leo it's ruled by the Sun. So there's that whole, it ties back into right. So wherever my Sun is, right here, if you look at right here, if you look at the Sun rules Leo, so you look at where the Sun is, and that's where it's expressed through connecting with people and being able to just be myself, but in a very, like, because people get intimidated, especially with this power thing. This is a power struggle thing with the Pluto there, conjunction, especially with like the 4th house. When I get comfortable with people, that's when I start to become more show-offy, so to speak. Again, but fuck that, right? So that's their thing, that's not my thing, and it's totally okay, whatever they're going through. They need to learn how to shine. That's in their own way. And if they don't, that's not my journey. But I do respect that they have their own opinions, they have their own journeys, they have to go through that. So you look towards your Saturn for those kind of things, or fear, but also Pluto. Pluto, I would say, is ties into that as well, because Pluto is not really fear, but Pluto is, as you may already know, it's a very powerful planet. It's small, right? It's a dwarf planet, okay, but it is small, and it is, wherever you have Pluto, is trying to reveal the truth. So in this case, true ego, and this is more like this is what I love about this one, that it's like, even though I've had, I would say, literally like a lot of dark nights of the soul, a lot of it, like a lot of it, and I still go through it. I regenerate a lot. Often, this is a regenerative planet, so it's like, people might find me like antisocial, but I'm like, okay, well, because you don't understand the depth behind Pluto. Pluto is like deep, right? So wherever Pluto is in your chart as well, look to that. And Saturn and Pluto, this is why the pandemic, when the pandemic hit and it's still kind of here, Saturn and Pluto introduced that. Saturn Pluto was in conjunct in Capricorn, and it went. So it's a revelation of structure and destructuring, and it was just like, what better way than to destructure than through viruses, right? And it scares the shit out of most people. But I think that this is also the time, both Pluto and Saturn represent, in a way you can say, death, in a literal way, in a figurative way, in a concrete way, but also in an abstract way. Either way, and that's what it is, right? So I think one of the things I've been learning to embrace is just like, when I'm living in the moment, I'm not going like, do this, all this stuff, right? Of course, I'm doing that I'm mocking my own egoic self. That's why I'm doing that. So it's getting used to the fact that it's like, I could be dead tomorrow. This could be dead tomorrow, but it's eternal, and it's a beautiful thing when you surrender to that kind of stuff. When I say that kind of stuff, I don't mean it lightly. I mean, you surrender to the moment, and this is what it is. So the ego beliefs start to crumble, and as you go through, this is healthy that you go through the dark nights of the soul, or whatever process you need to go through, and that is through I would say definitely through Pluto and Saturn. So wherever Pluto is in Saturn, the only thing I can tell you is, like, from my own personal experience, that I hope that these planets and these things in your chart, the chart has been showing you that it's like, okay, even if it's a transit, it's a visiting planet, right? That's visiting. That you have learned to embrace all that and really, or at least embrace it bit by bit. It is these are slow moving planets, especially Pluto. So it's going to take time, but you allow that. It's not the time to go back into unconscious, egoic, sort of like, low vibrational. It's very tempting for the most part. Yeah, it is. Because it's like, it's easy, it's comfortable. But I noticed that the more I do that, if I were to go back to kind of stuff, I feel this, like, I feel uncomfortable up here. It's especially, like, I don't know, maybe because of something with my Chiron in Taurus or something, and Sedna's coming through, and something about those things. I'm not going to go through it that much. Yeah. Oh, another thing I wanted to share was, if we go through the chart again, let's see what else we have here. You can also go through, Orcus. Look for Orcus. If you can find Orcus in your chart, you can find Orcus in terms of, like, I don't know if you could already see it. Right here is Orcus. If you see Orcus is going to be your teacher, to be more honest. It's basically like Pluto, but Orcus is kind of like I guess the voice of Pluto. You can say that. It's like the counselor to Pluto, and not just counselor, but like he's kind of like the. Okay, so this is the truth behind what's, if you don't want to hear it, Orcus is going, no, you got to listen to it. Otherwise, if we don't learn to be honest with ourselves and really be true to our word and true to our promises, what we came here to do. And also the simple little earthly things, 3D things that you said, I want to do this. Are you sure you want to do this? Why do you want to do it? One of the things that came to me today was when I was helping another student with English stuff. Anyways, is that he said, we kind of came to this conclusion and said that everybody just wants to be happy. But what is that? Happiness. Right? If you think about it again and again, you see it all the time now. It's like, what is happiness? Well, is it really doing? No, it's being, right? So you have to be, and it ties in also to the law of attraction and everything else and all the laws. Happiness has nothing to do with anything outside of ourselves. And I'm still learning that myself, and it's a total, it's a process. So look to orcas. I would also look to, if you want like those kind of transformative things, orcas as well. But also going to add here, I would say, who are the, what is that one? Osiris, right here. I have Osiris conjunct Vesta, actually Vesta. So a lot of releasing. I see it again. I'm being reminded of it again today. Okay, Osiris. Okay, transformation. So in this case, transformation towards not being so hooked into being in the background, but we literally like braving it out and being courageous and being more in the foreground. This is why I have this YouTube channel. So Osiris is conjunct there, and it's like, oh my goodness, wonderful, wonderful reminder. But I also have Anubis, and Anubis is actually in perfect conjunction. What you call perfect conjunction? Pretty much. It's 42 minutes as well. So by like 2 minutes off, maybe several whatever second, conjunct. But Anubis in retrograde. Anubis here is in retrograde in, looking at it now, okay, it's conjunct midheaven, so how people see me. And also, so there's a repetition of that, so, but it does influence both the houses, but I would say more the 9th house, but also the 10th house. So personal wisdom, like experiences, higher education, higher consciousness, anything to do with dogma, anything to do with travel, particularly like I don't know if you can feel it. I can feel the energies of the houses and the signs and the planets. Whenever I talk about them, this is why sometimes words don't come through, but I get it. I sense it. And it's like, oh, okay. It's interesting. I would say hone your psychic skills, your psychic, intuitive, instinctive, all of the skills, so you can sort of also sense. I think that's one of the things that I would probably start going through first. If you are interested in astrology, if you do it, there's also a sense of that energy as well. It's in yourself. Every aspect, every planet that there is in the house, any of the signs, mainly the planets, they're inside. They're part of the whole psyche. Everybody has an Anubis. Everybody has a Charikal. Everybody has Ceres, everybody has a sun, everybody has Venus, everything. Everybody has everything, all of these things. And just where and how they express themselves, so to speak. Right? Whatever. Okay, so I wanted to go through this Anubis thing because I'm curious that I haven't really analyzed some of these So I'm looking through my notes. Okay. Personal rebirth, Anubis is above, seen below, soul's journey, life and death passage, honoring one's death process, the transformation and transformation. Okay, so processing loss. So in this case, the loss of reputation, which ties in also to, this is more about the reputation, how people see me, the midheaven stuff, the angle itself versus the house itself. Because I have, you probably already see, I have Chiron here. This is also a loss. This is a wounding. But this is a wounding towards service. This is a wounding towards helping others. Anubis just states the process of healing through loss. It's not less strong. It's not about which one is more powerful or not. But it is representing a lot of transformation through death and endings. Works well with okay. Okay. Integrity, values, self-judgment, truth, and justice. We need to work before we move on. Okay. We need to work cultivating honesty and fairness. So that kind of ties in a little bit, yes, with Pluto, but also with Saturn as well. And Osiris is all about fertility, afterlife, the dead. Is the kind of wounding by consensus in society, indoctrination, self-exploration, self-transformation. It is very much like Pluto, but the difference between Osiris and Anubis is that Osiris is more about coming to terms with the losses or transformation through understanding the resources we get from that. So it's a little bit more like Pluto when it comes to meaning like finding our inner resources, our inner how we get those sort of like abstract or concrete or literal resources from personal experience, whatever loss it is. I would say Anubis is more abstract than Osiris, because Osiris represents, it says here, what I came up with myself is the urge to get or have a backup, meaning like sort of like resourcing, self-resourcing. It's where we process and learn from weakness, because sometimes being weak can be to our detriment, but at the same time, it's also a good thing. When you're weak, the gift behind that is shadow work, right? The gift behind that is for sure just giving over and trusting to the divine. Where Anubis is concerned, though, it's where we adapt to the fruits of loss. So it's a little more abstract. So they're both similar, but Anubis is more about adaptations. So as you may already know, Anubis was the god of the underworld, I believe. Anubis, the god of death. I forgot what it was in Egyptian mythology. Well, whilst Osiris was, I totally forgot. I have to look more into that and see what I can find. But I'm starting to get the feeling of that, because if I look into ninth house Anubis, I did go through that, and I have been going through that where it's like people see me as this, and people because I'm too intense and all that stuff. It is opposition to Pluto and Sun. But I also have Andromeda X something, one of these, so it guides from that, being guided and saying, okay. And I also have Arachne here, conjunct. I believe Arachne is conjunct in 26 degrees. I'm not sure, or before that. It is conjunct. I believe it's conjunct Anubis. So this whole loss of reputation, specifically because adapting to this loss while still embracing my God-given gifts and my divineness and my divinity and my godhood, and it's like, and not giving a fuck about any of that stuff. And it's funny because like I do get through that in my isolation, specifically like dreams. In modern astrology, the 12th house is like dreams, because we did talk a little bit earlier, but 12th house is also kind of like, it's an ending type of house, not necessarily the house of endings, which is the 4th house, but it is also the 12th house when it comes to that. I should have mentioned technically the water houses, but yeah. So anyways, but traditionally speaking, the 9th house is about dreams, so both of them apply, and this makes perfect sense right here. So in my own self-nurturing, I had to discover that it's like, okay, well, forget reputation, forget all that shit. Who cares what other people think of me? I have my own God-given skills, and I have my own, beautiful, I'm part of the consciousness that came to this body, and it's like incarnated here, incarnated, and all that stuff. And I'm learning to trust that more. So it's a beautiful thing. I'm kind of caring less and less and less and less about the stories in the head, but also the stories that other people say. Well, I don't really get those as much, which is a good thing, because it's like, I just, whatever. it's funny, right? It's the ego. You laugh at the ego because it's like, it's this immature child, right? Children are beautiful, but when a child becomes immature because it's starting to develop its ego, it's like, wah, 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 that's the ego. What else do we have here? Oh, okay. It is actually in the Grand T square here. There's actually Terabellum right here as a fixed star. I don't know much about that, which I believe is there. I also have actually, what's that asteroid here? Something about moral code. It's in Capricorn right here. In the if you're last degrees, or I think it's 21 degrees. I totally forgot. I forgot the name. Astraea, I don't know. I totally forgot. But moral code, so being standing in my own in the ground, and when it comes to relationship or relating with people, the descendant right here. So, anyways, that's for another time. But I mentioned that because specifically because it's in Capricorn and Saturn rules Capricorn, right? So, but because it was conjunct to descendant, it affects both 6th house and 7th house. So moral code with like being healthy and sort of connecting that and relaying that with relationships, and kind of sticking to your guns and be like, okay, well, this is what I believe, this is what I think it works, or at least this is what works for me. And if you don't believe it, that's fine. If you don't take it, that's fine. Do your own thing, but I know what works for me. And that kind of opposition with being nurturing towards myself ties back into right here. Orcus is also right here. I don't know if you noticed in my previous chart, Orcus is right here as well. It's conjunct my ascendant. So it's like being completely honest with how I project myself onto others and what comes out, and if they don't like it, whatever. That's your thing. That's their thing, that's your thing, that's my thing, whatever. We're all in this together, but at the same time in our own unique way. Just like a cell is, right? It has its own unique function, like an organ, part of the bigger whole. But the ego wants to separate all of it. It's like this. The ego is so ridiculous, right? If you really think about it, it's that part of us that it's like a hand that wants to move on its own. It's like, it doesn't make sense. It's like the liver that goes, I want to separate. It's like, why? It doesn't make sense. You came from source. You're connected. We're not really the waves. We're the ocean. And starting to make more sense. The more I do these things, the more I talk about it, the more it comes to me, the more I get these signs, the more I get these. It's just wonderful, wonderful blessings. And this is why I've now come to really enjoy astrology more, because it's like, okay, the signs are coming through. And I don't rush anything anymore, because it's like, it'll come. It'll come. So Osiris there also is part of that whole shadow process, but also Lilith. Look to your Lilith. I don't have it in my chart here, but look to Lilith, because that's more about shadow stuff, but that ties into your fear of dying. What are you afraid of? I know I have oscillating Lilith right here. And that's, apparently I have Shapley Attractor, and I'm so proud of this one. I'm so glad that this came through and this soul came through, because apparently I'm like fucking magnetic as fuck. Apparently. Because I have Sun conjunct not only oscillating Lilith, Pluto, Arcturus, but also Shapley Attractor, and it's right there. And it's just like, I don't know, nobody can just tell me this. I think I discovered this myself, and it's like, oh my goodness, wonderful, okay. And yeah, so anyways, I just thought I'd kind of mention that. But anyway, so fear of dying is a normal process. Fear of many things is especially like someone told me recently through work that it's like, oh, the U.S. Is going through, people are wearing masks again. The virus, I'm like, the virus never left. The virus is always here. Let's stop pretending that it's gone. That's being in denial, right? I would say really look for your Orcus. Where is it in your chart? What is it trying to tell you? Look through your progression chart. Look through your solar arc chart, if you can do that. I've yet to kind of work with that as well. Look through your relocation chart with the solar arc chart. If you have a relocation chart with solar arc chart plus progression, I don't know, whatever you can do, play around with it. Kind of like what I'm doing. It's like just playing around it, and it's just like, fuck it. Who cares? Just have fun with it. Take it from me, and I'm really honoring my North Node. So anyways, After this video, I'm going to post 2 videos on how you can probably use it if you want to. I've set it to the vibrations and frequencies of Pluto and Saturn, plus more. So if one of them is meditative, both of them are meditative in a way. So I look forward to actually posting that. But in the meantime, I hope this gave you some insight. And one of the things I wanted to mention is that because I'm really honoring my North Node. And Leo is not necessarily here to teach per se. I'm kind of showing what I discover from my own experience. So, but if you do have any questions, you do let me know. Comments down below, whatever it is, even if it's negative, whatever. I'll process it. You know, it's a Pluto process. I don't really care. If it's negative, it's negative. If it's positive, whatever. Doesn't matter. But if you do have any questions, I'll do my best to help you out. But you know, if you know it already, you may or may not know, North Node in Leo is something that I'm processing, right? I'm honoring it more while still also honoring the past, right? So thank you so much, beautiful people. I will see you guys later. Look forward to those videos. I don't know exactly when I'm going to post them, but I hope this kind of gave some insight. Thank you so much for your time.